Welcome to Tanversations. I'm Tanya, a 20 something working in venture capital and excited about the Web3 space. In this podcast, I'm going to be diving into the biggest questions that I have, mostly about work, but also about life and everything in between, by turning to my elders that include venture capitalists, experts, entrepreneurs, writers, philosophers, activists, and even 26-year-olds. So grab your pumpkin spice lattes, kombucha, iced coffee, and 16th other beverage as we go through these conversations together. My guest for today is Tobias Bauer. Tobias is the partner of Blockchain Founders Fund, which invests in top-tier startups in the Web3 space. He actually started there as an associate 4 years ago and made his way up to partner level. He is also a startup mentor for APX, PlugAndPlay, Alchemist Accelerator, and is a venture partner of Republic. He previously worked in the investment team of Chinaccelerator, one of the global elite accelerator programs operated by the venture fund SOSV, with 907 million plus AUM in China. He also worked for the German government in Thailand, where he co-organized the NSTF, a career fair with 1.1 million visitors, in order to enable students to build their professional careers. He has lived in 9 different countries across 15 cities and is fluent in Mandarin, English, and German. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. No, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, and I'd love to start off with your journey. I know it's a very unique and a very non-traditional journey. So I'd love to kind of learn a little bit more about your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think my whole story basically started out in Germany, which doesn't sound that special at first, but basically I grew up in a very beautiful countryside, small place, 4,000 people, more cows than people. And I was very protected, right? I had a very nice childhood, nothing much going on. Building tree houses since I was young, that kind of style of type of childhood. And a lot of my friends, a lot of the people I grew up with, they obviously, stay within that village. It's beautiful, it's comfortable, it's nice, and I think a great place to retire. And sort of growing up my family, they always have a little bit of an idea of like getting outside of that whole protected village life. So when I was young, they made me travel to some extent, and you kind of get an idea, okay, the world is a little bit bigger than what you can see in front of your doorstep. And that was very impressive, right? But it's obviously challenging if the whole mindset is just very, very different. And you also just have a limited access, right? I mean, I guess still privileged being in Germany and living in a small village, but at the end of the day, it's when I met people later on growing up in Munich, Berlin, New York, the exposure was very, very different. And maybe you notice for yourself as well. It's really like the people you surround yourself with, right? And like no one really had the aspiration of going back. And I just was back in my village for something like a class reunion, if you want to call it like this. And I think I was the only one out of 150 people who actually left Germany and made it further than Munich. There's one other guy who went to Barcelona and one other guy went to Milan, but that's basically it, right? So you get the idea of it. And my dad pushed me to go to university. I was the first person in my family to go to university. Honestly speaking, I had not really an idea what I was doing. I just picked business because it was the only thing which made a little sense to me and was like a little bit interested in when I was in school. And made it to Vienna, which is not that far from Germany. Made it to Innsbruck, which is a smaller city, but still an hour away from home, so it's not too crazy. You just slowly getting started. And honestly, within university, did a lot of non-business related things. Right, I was always meeting people. I was out. I was in sports, very big at this point in time, in swimming and training and stuff like this. But I didn't really focus much on anything I'm doing right now or anything even just related to business. But then, you know, eventually you have this one point in time when it hits you and you'd be like, damn, I wasted a lot of times of my life, and now I need to like compromise and over compromise for that. Then I went a bit crazy. I tried to do many things, get a lot of exposure. You know, and eventually ended up in Munich, and you know, I worked in literally retail, in bars, supermarket to make money early on to pay for rent. Like it was a, you know, cool experience. I was a tour guide at some point in
Wow.
time at a castle, and you know, just trying to get a hang of, you know, how life works, how making money is, how meeting people is, and all these different things. And then eventually got hired by PwC, you know, one of the larger consulting firms out there, and did my first sort of deep dive into business consulting. I was working a lot on restructuring projects, and then from there the journey went all over the place because my idea of life was always, I'm going to try out as much as possible. I'm going to try out as many things as different as possible in different countries because I just want to like see how it's actually out there, right? When I was interviewing for a lot of companies, the idea, you know, the HR people always gave me was like, oh, you need to PwC, then you need to do this, and then eventually you can get your dream job at McKinsey or some of these other larger companies. And I just did exactly the opposite they told me. So I went to a bigger corporate, you know, like Nivea, worked there for a bit. I did investment banking for a bit. I worked at the German government in Thailand. You know, did basically legal work there. I worked in Japan for Mitsubishi Fuso, which is like a local larger conglomerate. I worked in China for 3 years, learned the Chinese language. I worked with startups in China, worked as an English teacher in China. I taught a movie theater staff how to operate with Chinese English customers. I
Wow.
eventually joined a venture capital fund in China called SOSV, and you know, got a lot of exposure in investing in companies, mostly in and out China. Like the thesis we had was like, okay, let's support companies who go into China and help them figure out their business model because we know it better. Turnout didn't really work so well, and then we sort of diversified and just invested in early stage companies across Asia. And a company also rebranded now in Orbit and is quite successful. And then eventually, I always wanted to do my own thing. I joined a startup called Atium, and we raised some funding. We grew the company to product market fit, and got clients in, and then, you know, business pivoted eventually. And because I was early in China, the whole crypto rally started over there, right? Like Crypto Monday started there. You know, all the big exchanges early on came out of China, or at least founded by someone with a Chinese background. And then you kind of get pushed into crypto if you're in the startup scene. I was in Shanghai at this time and met a lot of early figures there. And obviously it was a Wild West out there, no one exactly knew what's happening. And then I met Ali Mansour, which are my current partners at Blockchain Founders Fund, and we decided to have our own fund, right? Like we decided, I think we can do that. We have diverse experience and different backgrounds. We've worked with startups, we have raced with startups, we have invested in startups. You know, also did angel investing. You know, basically throughout that time as well, we invested in crypto, obviously, from a personal perspective, and then we decided, okay, there's actually really cool things we can do with the technology, and then we decided to launch a company. We launched a company in Singapore, and then we started off with a smaller fund. We deployed that fund. We paid the money back, and it was successful. And then we ended up raising another fund, which was larger, which was $75 million, which was more or less like a year ago. And out of that money, we've been sort of deploying in now over 150 companies, and also invested in a couple of other funds, more from like a strategic deal flow perspective. And COVID hit, and during that time as well, then I moved from Singapore to Cambodia because, honestly speaking, it was the only place in the world where there was no COVID restrictions. So I had a great time in Cambodia, meeting a lot of people over there, sort of exploring the very early startup ecosystem. I was teaching at a university at the same time, and then moved back to Singapore once COVID sort of settled a little bit more and Singapore opened up their borders. And then ever since, we've been very active in the community. From speaking at various different conferences around the world. I think I crossed the more than 300 crypto conferences globally now, which I was you know, speaking at in various different places. Some of them are better, some of them are less good, but overall, I think it was a great exposure from a marketing perspective for the fund, but also just like, meeting a lot of startups and ecosystem players, co-investors. And then now I'm still in Singapore, just trying to be active in community and obviously deploying into what we think are great companies and who can really have an impact into the space and what they're doing with the technology in the business.
Yeah, wow. That's quite a journey, I have to say. But I think, the cool thing is I actually really relate to the way you started, because I grew up in like a really small town in India as well. Wasn't like there wasn't a lot going on there, but then, eventually found myself in Hong Kong and now in Singapore. But I think I want to focus on like different parts of your journey, because I think there's so much there to like unpack. So what I really want to start with is like China. So when you were in China, what years were those? Was it like, so I would assume it's like in the tech, when there was like a tech boom and crypto was just kind of starting out. Was it around then?
Yeah, so I was in China during different parts of my life. I mean, the first time I lived in China was in 2016, over to like 17, early 18. Then I left for a bit and came back in end of 18, like early 19, and was there throughout basically until COVID hit.
Oh, wow.
So in 16, 17, that was early days for, I mean, not so much for tech. There was obviously like stuff happening, right? And like there was larger corporations already running around, and especially e-commerce and like all these things were kind of booming in China, and people ordered like crazy. And also crypto started out at that point in time, right? 17, 18 was sort of that whole ICO boom
Yeah.
market thing. And then some larger corporations emerged out of this. And then in 2019, everything was a little bit more stable, right? We were sort of gearing up to that recent bull market in 2020 and 2021, where then also new use cases were introduced, like NFTs and DeFi and gaming and all this stuff. And yeah, no, it was a very interesting two different sides of China. Because at first when I moved to China in 2016, I was in Chengdu, which is in Sichuan, which is not a typical place if you think about China. I mean, most people obviously go to like Shanghai, Beijing, or like Shenzhen, and that gives you like a very different exposure. I mean, it helped me a lot also to learn the language, because you just there's no foreigner you can talk to, and if you don't speak English, if you don't speak Mandarin, then like
Yeah.
yeah, good luck. It's challenging. And but I made it a sort of a mission early on. I really wanted to learn the language, because I in most of the places where I lived longer than a year, I was trying to at least learn the language. And like when I look at learning languages, it's how I look at most of the things, is like it needs to be meaningful, and like being able to communicate with about 1.3 billion people around the world is good ROI. And learning Chinese, especially if you are thinking, or if you're assuming that China's become or has become and will potentially become relevant, right? And has already demonstrated that in many different ways, from either manufacturing, from tech, and so on and so forth. So that's why I was like very dedicated to learn Chinese. I took every morning from 8 to 12, I took Chinese language courses 6 days a week. And then pushed hard on learning how to read, write, speak. And that helped me a lot, because that gives you exposure into Chinese communities where we wouldn't necessarily have access to so easy. It was able to help me to communicate with startups. I was able to, work with Chinese coworkers more effectively. And then when I came back in 2019 and we worked at the fund and all these different things, that's where like I knew that I wanted to stay in Asia, maybe not necessarily China, because obviously it was getting more and more controversial, and like crypto was banned at this point in time in China, right? So there was not much for us to do there, but it was still a relevant market, because there's still a lot of capital in the country, and a lot of developers, mining activities going on and things like this. And then Singapore was like a very interesting next step, right? Just from a legal standpoints, from capital access, and also just from a geopolitical standpoint, right? A lot of people in Asia set up the company in Singapore, but might be operating out of somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And then when you joined the fund, I saw that you started as an associate, but then very quickly kind of became the partner, which I know is like super hard to do. Because I worked in VC before, and to me it seemed like a very difficult thing to like jump so many levels so quickly. So what was that process like for you?
I think there's always two sides to it, right? It's obviously the person himself or herself who needs to obviously show effort and working hard, but I think it's also the environment within the company who needs to be able to allow you to step up and like take these responsibilities and show that you can do it, right? So I was very fortunate early on that the team I was working with was very open to giving me opportunities. And I think a big thing for me always, what I realized very early in venture capital is it's a people business at the end of the day, right? Especially if you do early stage investing at like pre-seed and seed level, where there's just necessarily less information to look at, right? It's not like a late stage deal or private equity deal is what I've done across Germany and Middle East, where you have a lot more data to verify, right? You have revenue history, you have cash flow projections, you have all these things, and a lot more research, a lot more math, so to say, simple math is involved. In early stage investing, it's basically two things that matter. It's number one is, are you able to get deal flows early? Meaning, are you connected with founders, other venture capital funds, or just ecosystems that they think of you when they have an interesting deal? And number two is, are you able to evaluate those founders that you can think that they are the right team to bet on, right? Of course, yeah, the business still has to make sense, and you still have to believe that the business is going to make it, but it's always execution above idea, right? I see a lot of ideas, but do I think that some of them have the right team to execute the idea? Absolutely not, right? And that's why we typically stay away from companies like this. But that takes time, and I was like really hardcore on networking, to be honest. I was just really trying to meet a lot of people, learn from them, grow my network. Obviously, in my specific domain, I sort of came to realize that you have to narrow it down in order to get really deep into what you're doing, deep in the domain. And I've been doing this consistently ever since. And now do have, I would say quite a bit of network in the space, and can always be improved, of course, but it still helps to get into interesting deals. It helps to raise for companies, and that networking is very different formats, right? It's to an extent it's your speaking engagements, but like for me, this whole venture capital is more like a lifestyle, right? So a lot of people I do hang out with on a daily basis because they're just really cool people are also people I work with, right? And then you don't necessarily differentiate so much, which is dangerous, between life and work, because it just becomes sort of one thing. And it's fine because I like what I do, but of course you have to be careful. But I think that's a little bit how I look at venture capital, right? I mean, you need to be on the ground almost 24/7 to an extent to find these companies, to validate these companies, to make sure that they're able to be in an ecosystem where they're provided with both capital and advice, and of course, opportunities that they can grow and outgrow their competition. And I think that has really sort of given me a little edge of able to step up faster, because eventually at partner level or principal level, it's all about how much money can you raise for a fund, yeah, and how much deals can you bring to a fund, right? That's basically some of the key metrics. You need to be able to prove that you can do that, and that is a networking game, right? You need to know both the LPs, but also the other GPs, of course, from a co-investment perspective, from a deal flow perspective, and the founders and where these founders are at, and that you would know who they are before they necessarily go out and like raise money, right? And like the challenge for us as a smaller fund at first was, of course, I mean, if you're a founder, there's probably a couple venture capital funds you would think immediately, right? I mean, there's your A16Z, there's your Sequoia in crypto, right? You have your Dragonfly, you have like some of these larger branded names. Of course, they might not be a great fit for pre-seed companies, or in some cases they are, but you have to build that brand that like, okay, this is what you're focusing on, this is your thesis, this is where you operate, this is where you invest in, this is how much money you're deploying, and then sort of stick to that thesis. Because I think a lot of challenges I see with other funds is that they switch theses, and it does not only impact their strategy and how they're focused, but it also impacts that founders just get confused, right? Like, oh, before you were a metaverse fund and now you are a general fund. Like, it's very difficult to build that pipeline consistently if you're switch theses all the time, right? And especially if market changes. And I understand that it's easy to say, oh, we're not a token fund anymore, we're not an equity fund, because it's very difficult to raise some token in a bear market. I get that, but like, that should have been a decision beforehand, because that's not something new, right? It's common knowledge that there is shifts in what assets people are investing, what companies people are investing. So we always try to stay very like clear to our thesis. Of course, like some of the sub theses are changing and what we look at, of course, but overall we've all been very true to ourselves, and I think that helped us to just like get to the ground of where the people are and make good decisions.
Yeah, for sure. So actually, I want to go like dive into both these parts that you mentioned, like being able to raise from LPs and having that deal flow within the startup ecosystem as well. So kind of starting out a little bit more with the startup ecosystem. So when you're personally evaluating companies, I think you touched on it a little bit when we were talking about it earlier, but then when you're kind of evaluating founders, especially at the stage that you guys invest, where I would assume it's more about the founder and the team, as opposed to, traction and revenue and things like that. So what are the kind of things that you look for in a founder, as well as like a project when you're investing?
So when we are assessing if we should invest in a startup or not, yes, one of the first things we are doing is assessing the founders. And as I said, probably like there's three things that we look at, and I go through three of them. Number one is the founders. Number two is the problem they're solving a big enough pain point that we think customers will pay for a solution to that pain point, right? Because that indicates that there's product market fit, that indicates that it's monetizable, and that it eventually can generate revenue off it, which has been a challenge in crypto, right? Because a lot of companies have not been generating revenue or generating inconsistent revenue by selling assets, which is not necessarily a very healthy way of running a company. And then the third thing is kind of like progress over time, right? And I go deeper into that later. So founder, I always think about when I invest or when I have conversations, at least first or second time conversations with founders, I think of it a little bit as like running an HR call, right? What I mean by that is that I'm focusing a lot on like, why are they building this business? How invested are they in making this business a success? Because you probably also know that, being an entrepreneur, running a startup is a very tough journey, right? It's no joke. Everything will go wrong. You can probably imagine will go wrong, and then even 10 times more. And it's going to be very boring, and it's going to be hard and annoying, and you will hate it at some point in time, and you will love it at some point in time. Especially, you typically have this like first couple of months where everything is awesome. You buy a domain, you do your website, everything's freaking cool, and then like you realize, damn, it's not that cool actually. And then like you go through a whole wave of just pain, right, before things get better. A lot of people are not able to go through that pain because they're not fully convinced that this is what they need to do, right? It's very easy if you've been like a high paid investment banker, you say, I'm going to leave that company now to like try to be a startup, and then after 6 months you're going to be like, this is horrible, I don't have any money, right? I have to go through my savings, people are leaving, everybody gives me no's, right? Everything goes wrong. It's very easy to go back to your job, right? Or like, let me go back to my bank, or let me go back to my other job and just do it again. And then that's, I think, a big challenge, especially in crypto, where a lot of early people have been in the space who made money simply by investing in assets, right? Like just Bitcoin or whatever. And like they think money is very easy accessible, which is not necessarily always the case.
Yeah.
There are periods where it's very difficult to make money or very difficult to get money for certain things. And there's better times, of course, as well. But a lot of these people who have never experienced, such challenges might not be the right founder for a company. And then also like I want to really understand their domain expertise, right? Like have they done proper research? Do they understand the market? Like I almost want to say I want to feel dumb in a call, right? If I think I'm smarter than the founder on a domain, I shouldn't be smarter than the founder because I'm a generalist VC. I have a problem with it, right? That is a challenge. If the guy doesn't know his competitors well, if the or the whoever is that you're speaking with, right? Then that's a challenge because it feels like it's a rushed idea to do the startup, right? A lot of people spend quite a bit of time to actually do some market research, to talk to people, build their domain expertise, maybe come even from a background at a bank where like this was a pain point for a very long time and they feel like this technology now or like this space can help solve it. So that's another big part of assessing the founder. I think there's also a big idea around, there can be a founder can be great from 0 to 1, but might not be good from 1 to 2 or from 2 to 100, right? Because there's very different skill sets required. If you're a good founder from 0 to 1, then you're motivated, you point at vision, you're hardcore, right? You're not easy to get pushed down. But then eventually, like you need to be able to lead a team, right? You need to be able to build culture within the organization. You need to be able to manage resources properly. You need to focus on growth. You need to focus on profitability to make this company a success. And that's a very different skill set than from 0 to 1, right? So a lot of people are great founder. We know that like they are great, but like they'll probably replace down the road because they won't be able to manage or keep that growth of a business. So it's interesting to understand where we think that founder would fall into. And sometimes there are founders who can do everything, right? I mean, we have invested in cool companies where we see, okay, wow, this guy has been, you know, an amazing person to get the stuff off the ground, but is also able to run a decent organization and make it grow. But sometimes it's also not the case. And then a big thing is also around like reference calls, right? I literally have reference calls with founders' previous employers. I have reference call with founders' previous co-founders of understanding how it was to work with this guy or this lady or whoever, right? Because that also helps us to understand like how is this person going to work with us moving forward, right? Being on an equity cap table, especially, is a long term. I always call it almost a marriage because it's like an 8 to 10 year journey in some cases. And you want to have someone who is transparent, right? Who's honest, who's good at communicating, but also is able to, be focused, right? If like there's something he wants to do, sometimes only he knows what's best, right? Of course, he should evaluate if that's the best reason to do, but still at the end of the day, you want someone who's not like, oh yeah, let me just do exactly what my investor says because they're my investor, right? Like sometimes you need someone who has a little bit of a, not stubborn, but like has a very clear focus. So that's like the first part, what we're doing. We spend a lot of time on there, do background checks. We use various different platforms in order to make sure the founder doesn't have any, bad records or been involved in any scam projects before and so on and so forth. And then the second point, what I mentioned is this whole idea around understanding how big the pain point is. I think a big challenge in crypto, and that was kind of like a big wow effect when I came from, let's say, Web 2 investing into Web 3, is that a lot of companies are just not a company, right? Like, I mean, at some point in time, there was this debate between feature versus product. And I think that's a very interesting narrative here in crypto, because a lot of people, they are very degen driven and they want to trade like this, and like there's some things that always been bothered them using whatever exchange or DEX or something, and then now I need to like build a different DEX and change this one feature, right? Put a different UI and X on top of it, but it's basically the same thing. And it might be a problem for them, but it might not be a problem for everyone in the industry, right? And like as we've seen in Web 2 evolving, the companies who succeeded, if they were in a competitive space, they were substantially better than their competitors, right? They didn't just offer a slightly better UI, or they didn't offer just a slightly better experience or marginal, different fees. They're just tremendously better, right? That's how they were able to, in a way, I don't like this word, but disrupt, or at least like, get over these competitors and get people funneled in because they're like, oh wow, this is actually way better. This is an awesome product. And in crypto, this doesn't really happen so much, right? Especially also in AI is a great example right now. How many companies are actually companies, right? And not just like ChatGPT integrations with a different interface. and a different prompt system, right? Like that's basically the whole idea. So we need to understand, is that actually a really differentiated product, or are they just like trying to, I call it feature killing, right? Like just like try to put something better, and you know, disguise it as a new product. And that obviously is a lot of customer calls if they have customers already, right? Even if it's like beta users or anything, you want to talk to them, you want to have a conversation with them, see if they like the product or not. We try it out ourselves, of course, if it is ready to be tested. If there's nothing there yet, then like it's really like market research, right? Then we need to understand, okay, what's the vision for them and which competitor in the market comes closest to the vision. Obviously, work with the founder on this. They might have a couple of competitors. We do our own research and compare. And then I think the last part, which is progress over time, is I think the most important thing for me almost across all these things. And it's because, you know, you can have a great founder on paper, right? I mean, sometimes if I look at these people's CVs,
Yeah.
MBA from Harvard, and then 3 years at Twitter, or like, you know, 4 years at Coinbase, you know, the typical kind of CVs of people who get interest from investors. It doesn't necessarily tell me that this person is a great founder, right? He might be smart and he might even be hardworking, but is he a great founder, right? Is he entrepreneurial? Is he thinking outside the box? Or is he more a corporate person, right? There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with both of them, but there's just a different skill set, different mentality required. So what I want to know very specifically, and that's why I'm also doing a lot of these reference calls, is really understanding what have you done on your previous company, right? Because a lot of people are like, oh, I've been a lead developer at Twitter and I was involved in like a lot of things. But like, what have you actually driven? Like, what was actually your progress over time? You've been there for 3 years. What has changed when you were there? And was the impact significant enough to leave a dent in the company if you would leave, right? The same thing if they have done previous startup, or especially when you're evaluating founders which do not have these brand recognitions on their CV, right? They work for like smaller companies, small users businesses, startup which failed, whatever, something which is not so glorious and shiny. It doesn't actually matter to me at all, as long as I can really tell that this person has done a lot of progress over time, right? If he worked at a medium-sized company I've never heard of, but he scaled the organization from $1 million to $20 million in revenue, hired a team of 15 people, and made the whole process better and smoother and more amazing, then that's a lot more interesting to me than someone who has just been a coder on at a FAANG company and has a fancy degree. You know what I mean? Because this guy actually had an impact, had a tremendous impact.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you fully get what I'm saying, but like it's really important also to look back, right? I mean, what have you as a person done where you have actually had an impact?
Yeah.
And what are you most proud of? So like a lot of these questions are very important to us. And of course, that is not just a previous thing. It's also like if this company has been operating since like 6 months, a year, right? They might not have a product yet fully live. But it's always very interesting to compare cash burned to progress.
Yeah.
Right? Because some companies they are very resourceful and they're able to make things work. And then there's founders who are like, I have this idea, but I need to raise money before I can start. And that's already a problem for me, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of things you can do without much money. You just have to put in time and effort, right? And be creative sometimes. But that really shows me that, okay, even if times get tough, you're not going to be standing there and be like, oh, I don't have money. I need to stop working now, right? It's like, yeah, sometimes you have to have just like, you know, be a gritty founder and just try to make it work. And I think that's what we see right now a lot more. I'm actually quite excited about that some of these companies really have shown this amazing progress over time with very little burn and being very resourceful in the current environment, if you know what I mean. And yeah, and that's what makes us excited about an early stage company. Of course, we still figure out if there's any red flags from a legal side, of course, if it fits our mandate, if it's too late or early stage, these hard criteria need to be met. But overall, that is a really important drive. And I think if you can answer all these questions with a yes, you probably have an interesting lead.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I remember even when I was working in VC, they used to always tell me that look for grit, grit. And I was like, okay, how do I tell if a founder is gritty, But I think that's one thing that I really had to learn over the last couple of years. But what I find really interesting about what you said is that, to you, it's more important how much of a dent or an impact that a person has made, regardless of, what their CV is. And I know that, I've spoken to so many VCs in the last few years, and I don't think a lot of them have ever, mentioned this. So I find this quite interesting. And do you think it's because you yourself have like such a non-traditional background, so you're able to look at it from that perspective? Or do you think it's just maybe like something that your fund looks at in particular, and that's why you've imbibed it?
I mean, I've always, it's actually a very good question. I think definitely my lifestyle and journey has played into that. And also, I've worked with a lot of people who had a very untraditional background in the past, and they were amazing at what they were doing, right? Because I think a lot of people who don't have that, and maybe you can relate to that, coming from a smaller village, maybe where your parents are not already business people, and a lot of stuff just wasn't given to you. You had to fight for it, right? You had to convince people. You had to be creative, right? That's what I'm saying. If your family already gives you all the contacts you need, like how would you learn how to be creative, right? I mean, I literally scraped LinkedIn profiles when I was, I don't know, 10 years back, right? And like I reached out to them cold. I went in a banking lobby, sat there for 5 hours because I want to meet this person, right? I mean, that's kind of the idea what I want to see, right? It's very easy to sit there and be like, okay, I am privileged and I should be getting this. And then, and it works for a lot of people. But like if someone is able to do a lot of things and still get there, maybe it takes a little longer, maybe it's a little slower, but get there, you learn a lot over the journey, right? And you take a lot of these experiences, and once you face similar situations, you'll be faster and better, right? And because it's just what you have naturally been picked up. I think that's where a big difference is also between book smart and street smart, of people who just like find solutions for something, and that can be completely out in the ordinary, right? And yeah, I think I mean there was one situation when I wanted to get into startups, I disguised myself as a waiter and went to a demo day,
Oh my
which was
God.
invite only, and I talked to every single founder of what drinks they wanted to have, and eventually got in touch with a lot of people and got their contact details, right? Without revealing one time that I was an actual waiter. Like, I mean, I'm not saying you should do that, but I'm saying like these are some of the ideas you should be having as a founder and figuring out, okay, like how do I get to where I want to be in a most resourceful and efficient manner, right? And that's a trial and error situation. And I think what I was quite excited about Blockchain Founders Fund, they had a very similar approach. Like my other two partners also don't have a very straightforward, traditional sort of, oh, I was a banker and now I'm a private equity guy, and now I'm a VC fund, or I come from McKinsey and then now I'm going to this VC fund and invest in startups. We have all built stuff, right? We've all helped companies, all worked with early stage companies. We've already been on the other side as well, so we know how difficult it can be, and we also kind of know what people made it over there, right? Because when you're in the founder community and you're a batch company of an accelerator, whatever, like you kind of get to know what do people need to bring to the table in order to succeed. And you will also know at some point in time which are the people who are going to give up.
Yeah.
You might not be right all the time, but like you can see traits, right? A lot of people are just not fully made for it, right? And that's totally okay. Not everybody should be a founder, and not everybody will be a founder. Um, and some people are just better coming in at Series A stage and helping a company grow because that's what they're really good at. But they might not be good at is getting this company off the ground and like doing all the dirty hard work by themselves. So to come back to your question, I think it's definitely driven by the way I view the world, but I think it's also something the fund um, was always very open to thinking about it. And it's not that we reject the company if you're from Twitter, right? Like that's not my point. um, we're completely open, but I'm saying like, I'm not impressed if I see Twitter on a CV, right? I'm only impressed when this guy actually tells me like, I literally built this whole thing and the company wouldn't be where they are if I wouldn't have been there, right?
Yeah.
And like, if there was no impact, either monetary impact or like the product impact or anything like this, that's what gets me excited, because then it's like, this guy actually built something, did something, and just, you know, found a way to make something work.
No, for sure. I think it's really great because a lot of times, especially this industry has been accused of being like a very kind of exclusive club where you can only get funded if you know the right people or if you have the right background. So I think it's really important because even for me, I believe that innovation happens everywhere. There are good founders everywhere, and you can't, only focus on the right resume or the right connections and things like that, even though, if the majority people who end up getting funded are those kind of people.
The only challenge though is with this, and that's kind of like the paradox in VC, is if you want to be a successful VC, right? And you go completely the other way and be like, okay, I'm going to focus on emerging market founders, less as a privileged founders, for example, right? I'm not saying that's what we're doing, but I'm just saying that I'm just go the other extreme now as an example. And you just don't get into these exclusive circles, as you said, where a lot of capital is being distributed by, this partner to this partner and this deal to this deal. Like the Silicon Valley hub, like New York, like, like all these people basically know each other and go to the same dinners, same things together. It's very difficult to be very, very successful, right? Because a lot of your companies will be struggling to raise. And that's like a big misconception, right? Is if companies don't get to profitability very fast, or at least to revenue generating, parts, the only thing that keeps them alive is funding. And you as a fund, you cannot just constantly like fund your own companies, right? Like your investors can be like, why are you constantly giving them money if no one else wants to give them money? Like, why are you interested in this? And so like there's that little paradox where like, you have to play and still be connected to the right people. But like what the VCs should be doing is getting people excited about things that they look at and don't just follow, right? And I think we see a lot of this just following stuff, right? There's one person making a bet and that person or that company has a brand, and then a lot of people are following. And it's logical, right? From a human perspective, you think about it, because if I go to our investment committee and, you basically say something like, oh, this company is backed by whoever, big name. There's an immediate sense of release and trust for a lot of people, right? Because it's like, oh, they would have done due diligence on it, right? Like they know, like they're a good fund, they're proven. And then like it's easier, even if the deal would go bankrupt, you can say, oh, but like, also Sequoia didn't see this, or also A16 didn't see this, or also blah, blah, blah didn't see this. And the proven fact is, and we've seen this with FTX, with many players in the space, where no one was actually looking at it properly. Doesn't matter how good or great the fund is. So like it's very dangerous to just follow, right? And that's what I'm looking more from the perspective of, I can build a very interesting narrative and defend the deal in my three buckets. I just explained to you: the founder, the market, and the progress over time. Then I can go from the other side and be like, I have a really interesting narrative. You guys should look at this. And it makes sense because I checked all the boxes and the founder is an interesting guy. And if you then connect it with the right people and you're in the right ecosystems and you build enough trust with those people, then they would back a deal which might be a little bit outside of their traditional sort of structure. But it doesn't mean that the deal will be less successful, because then you still have the brands and you still create that FOMO for the market. And then you still give the company enough money to succeed. And you have a gritty and interesting founder who is not blended by things just fall into place for him or her.
Yeah, that makes sense. So just kind of zooming out of, investing in companies to fundraising as a fund. So I know you guys closed your fund while it was still a bear market, which was crazy. But what was that process like? Do you feel like it was really difficult because, the market condition was not that great, or it was all right for you?
It was difficult, right? Of course, because during the time where we started raising for a fund, I think UST crashed, then FTX crashed, BlockFi died, Three Arrows Capital died. Basically, every single company in the space went to zero. But I think, and yes, like a lot of people were like not excited anymore about crypto. But I think what the good thing here is that a lot of people understood that this is not a technology problem, right? It's a bad actor problem. And it mostly happened within centralized organizations. Of course, there's still hacks and everything happening and stuff like this, but the fact that FTX went under is not a problem because of blockchain, that blockchain isn't secure, that crypto is a stupid thing. It's because someone on top, became a little more greedy and then misused customer funds. And people were not looking because there wasn't enough regulation and no one did the due diligence because money was coming from heaven, right? That's basically the narrative. And then eventually at some point in time, this whole thing collapses because it's not a fundamentally working business. And this can only sustain so long before it becomes obvious. And because that crypto industry is very transparent and a lot of stuff can be traced back, and you have obviously a rivalry between these major players, it's not surprising that things happen very quickly if someone smells that something is not right. And that's why I think our narrative has always been like, the technology didn't fail, and we believe in it, and there are a lot of, I would say, positive points to it. It is still very early, but there is a lot of positive nuances to it that this will become very, very relevant. And also, what was of course helpful is that even though some of the largest organizations literally plummeted overnight, Bitcoin didn't lose its full grid, right? It didn't go down to 10, 12, 9, 8, whatever, what people were expecting. It kept it sort of around like 20-ish, right? And now even back up to like, I haven't checked what it is today, but like probably about 30, whatever, right? And I think that is what makes it interesting for a lot of people still to look at the sector without actually like fully saying it's a scam, right? And like the way our LP base is looking like is not just crypto degen people and crypto companies and crypto funds. It's also a lot of family offices. It's also a lot of Web2 companies who are maybe not yet fully invested in it or fully convinced, but they say, I want to put in money because I want to understand it. I want to learn about it. I want to get exposed to it. And also because we as a fund have always been saying we want to offer co-investment opportunities at zero cost. Basically what that means is then if you like a company, we share materials with you if you want. And if that helps you, and if you want to co-invest with us, then we're not going to make your life more difficult. You can just do it, right? And that was something what got a lot of people excited because we already do the hard work and filter through a lot of companies a month. Why wouldn't we be transparent and give it out to a lot of people? And that kind of narrative is what I believe in it, because I do think the ecosystem is still very intransparent, and a lot of deals are just getting rejected and no one looks at it, and it might be a great fit for this fund because there's exactly the narrative, but it never reaches them because the founder doesn't know this fund. There's a lot of stuff we can do to improve it. It's not going to happen overnight, and we're not perfect, but I think we are walking in the right direction to make some of these things work.
Yeah, for sure. And my last question is, what is the one kind of space within crypto that you're really excited about investing in for the coming year or 2 years?
The coming 2 years. That's a challenge because it obviously changes very, very fast. I think right now, what a little bit my narrative is in my mind is, a lot of things that recently became relevant, like CK solutions, wallets, modular blockchain, like all these things are basically here to make the infrastructure easier, right? And we went away, if you think about it, from a very ecosystem driven investment approach, right? There were funds who said, I'm only investing in Solana projects because I think Solana is the future. And I think that narrative is almost completely gone, right? Everybody's thinking about it. It needs to be cross-chain. It needs to be user-friendly. It needs to be Web2-ish, right? More or less. That's why like a lot of these infrastructure pieces came along. So I think like building something within the space easy is what I'm kind of interested in right now, right? That includes like the whole CK space. That includes modular blockchains that includes developer tools, right? Because I think right now it's still very complex to actually build anything on chain, and that's why a lot of smart contract developers are able to charge high fees for what they're offering, because there's just limited supply on people who can do that. So companies who are able to offer no code smart contract developing, right, who are offering instant wallet creation, who offer a modular blockchain where it's just easier to push updates through and all these things on decentralized applications, on companies who are unifying certain approaches like APIs, SDKs, making everything sort of very easy, packageable. I think that's what is probably very interesting right now, because that's going to help make the space more mainstream and more accessible for people who don't want to deal with the technical knowledge of actually entering the space. So that's like a narrative I'm looking into quite quickly. So what can we do in order to make it easier for the builders to make better applications? And then I think what I'm also interested in, but I'm just still a little bit skeptical on how that would translate, is the whole social side of crypto. Like when people talk about SocialFi and decentralized social systems, like I'm very big on community, right? I'm very big on bringing people together, and I do think that social media has already proven to be the future in many different ways, not just the advertising and monetization part, but just like network as a virtual service, right? Eventually, and I think decentralized systems can have a very interesting point here. However, I think right now what people are missing is that they're not really making, it's again this whole thing, right? I mean, like, I'm not going to switch over and do a different LinkedIn or a different Instagram or anything just because it is decentralized, right? Just because I can own now something from a creator. I think the use case here is still not fully out, and it's a big chicken and egg problem, right? Like no user is going to change a network if there's no creators, and no creator is going to change a network if there's no user, right? And the way TikTok became big, for example, is because they offered videos, right? Because they said, okay, that's higher engagement, that's interesting. Instagram doesn't offer it. There's only YouTube with longer videos, so that's the market, right? And people bought into it, and it became big. And that's how everything started, right? Facebook, if you look at then the advancement to Instagram, that's Twitter covering a different space, more news and typing and tweeting. Whether LinkedIn is a professional network, right? So everybody has its kind of stance and offers a better way for that specific target group to consume their information, right? And right now in social, within Web3, we haven't fully seen that, right? There are some things where it went live, and some things everybody claims to have many, many users. But the challenge is like getting a creator on a platform is not a big deal. What I have to lose, right? If for example, if I would be a big influencer, I'd be like, yeah, I'm happy to try the platform, I'm happy to post 3 posts on it, give me $100,000. Awesome, right? Why wouldn't I? And you might even get some people over, but then if there's nothing happening, they're not going to stay, right? Yeah. So if I'm not actually convinced that this platform is better and I use it and I post it and I'm convinced, it's not gonna work, right? So I do think there's a lot of future there. I think we just haven't fully figured out the narrative, and haven't fully figured out yet of how to actually go to market on these things, because there's already good solutions in the market. Of course, you can still argue that there's challenges, and there are, of course, but it hasn't fully worked yet in any form.
Yeah, really. I think definitely like becoming more user friendly and the social aspect are like huge narratives in the upcoming cycles. So yeah, I'm excited to also see what happens with that. And yeah, I think those are all the questions that I had. Thank you so much for taking out the time. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great conversation. Thank you.